Great.
I have an error message, and also I can't chat.
Oh, that's okay, Sherry. Well, you can use the mic as well. That's totally fine. What
Yeah.
is your error? Did you see this error message along the top here?
It says, "Sorry, there's been a disconnect. We can't get that information right now."
Oh, that's interesting. Here, I'm going to give you a different persona. How about that? Let's try that, see if that works.
Sure, I like to be many different people. I work in mental health.
Oh, well, then there you go. We all like to
Could all
be
use
a
some help
different
there.
person. Yeah. I was going to say, I might have some questions for you later. Uh, but Sherry, there you go. Go ahead and try that persona for Alex, and let us know if let me know if that works for you. Great. So while everyone's still making their way here to Power Apps, I just want to go ahead and kind of give you a brief overview of it before we dive into it, and kind of explain what it is and some, aspects and features of it as we dive into it a little bit more in depth and get a little bit better idea of, what we can actually do, what's available to us here within this service. And Power Apps is a suite of app services and connectors, as well as a data platform. Those are all things to think about here as we're going through, and I'm going to be kind of explaining what all of that means to you when you're utilizing Power Apps. Then it provides a rapid development environment to, build custom apps for your business needs. Using Power Apps, you can quickly build these custom business apps that connect to your data. Stored in either in a couple different places. There's an underlying data platform inside of Power Apps, which is called Microsoft Dataverse. But you can also connect here to other on-prem or other data services running here in the cloud, whether it be through a very popular one and a very accessible one, in my opinion, is SharePoint. As well as you can connect to your SQL Server, you can connect the Dynamics, all of those things here as far as your CRM is concerned, depending on what you're utilizing the application for. It all depends. But the main focus here and the main, what I'm trying to get across is there are options. There are many ways to go about this as far as implementing data into your application, because an application without data, I mean, they really, that used to be a thing. They used to exist. They were static. But data is really what drives our applications these days. So as much as we talk about Power Apps, we are talking about data as well. Apps built using Power Apps provide you rich business logic and workflow capabilities to transform your manual business operations into a digital automated process. And what more, and apps built in Power Apps have a responsive design. They can run seamlessly in the browser or on mobile devices. And Power Apps democratizes the business app building experience to enable users to create feature-rich custom business applications without writing code. And one thing you're going to hear me say a lot today is this idea of a citizen developer. And Power Apps is kind of what bridges the gap between, actual pro developers that, can create applications here in Power Apps. They can choose to, you can actually import custom code into Power Apps as well. We call those custom components. To where you can add, logic that maybe is not native to Power Apps. Let's say, for example, there's not really like a drag and drop kind of feature inside of Power Apps, but you could write code that could be implemented into your Power Apps application and have that feature. So it's a great way for, the citizen developer to create things. And, you could always go to your pro developers within, if you have them on your team, and go ahead and they can add things that possibly aren't available to you. So it's a great way to collaborate, and it really bridges the gaps between our pro developer and our citizen developers. So it lets our developers interact with data and metadata and apply that business logic. And as I mentioned before, create custom connectors and integrate with external data as well. So where your experience really starts off here is with Canvas apps. It's a highly tailored interface with the power of a blank canvas and connecting to your choice then over 200 data sources. And you can build Canvas apps, as I said, for web, mobile, as well as tablet applications. you have that ability to choose that as far as when you start building that. So design and with business apps, it's in the canvas. It's kind of like when you do things in it, it is in a way in the background. Power Apps is like writing code for you. And we'll talk about here. I'll show you the things that are a little bit more code centric, but with the interface here of our Canvas apps, it provides a familiar feel, like utilizing PowerPoint or Word. And then even some things as far as logic inside of Power Apps. If you have some experience with Excel and like, maybe utilizing expressions or things like that within Excel, it's very similar to Power Apps. It's kind of like a combination between, like really like writing code and then the type of, code you would see inside of Excel as far as to perform, functions or things like that. So there's a variety of third-party sources that can connect to it. I'll show you that as well. But really what it is here, it's giving you essentially that, just to make things easier in your day-to-day life. I mean, that's ultimately what you're trying to do as far as within your organization. We're going to start off here with a template and kind of looking at that, something here in which Power Apps has to, kind of, you don't even really need to start from scratch, and you could start implementing your own business applications into your own environment. So that's what we're going to do here and explore our interface inside of Power Apps as we go about this. So what we're going to do, and I'm going to be highlighting with my cursor as far as where I'm clicking things and showing you things and things like that. And feel free to kind of play around. If you're not exactly doing exactly what I'm doing, that's okay. I'm going to encourage you to have some fun as well. It's totally fine. Like I said, these demo environments, you can't mess anything up. It's totally fine. Don't worry if you add something to the app that's like not on my screen. It's totally fine. You can have some fun with it here today. So really just a nice exploration and a little tutorial on how to get started and how to feel comfortable with a few different ways to create some apps. And we're really going to focus on two. And one's a little bit more just getting used to the canvas, but then the other one's a little bit more data driven. And that's what I want to kind of incorporate into this training as well. So what we're going to do is over here on the left-hand side, you have your little navigation hub inside of Power Apps, which you'll see a couple different things as far as a list of your apps. There's this table section. This would have to do if you had a Dataverse provision within your organization. In these demo environments, we can't. There's additional licensing that goes on with that. But that's another way to, as far as the data that you can use. It works like Dataverses are essentially set up as tables to where you can, easily kind of click around, create relationships. So it's kind of like you're almost like I like to say when you're utilizing those tables, it's like a step above like utilizing a spreadsheet, formatting it as a table. It's almost like you're a SQL developer, but not quite. But you can do a lot of the functionality that exists within more sophisticated databases, which is pretty cool. And you have flows and things like that. That has to do more with Power Automate, as far as automated things that actually can run, that your apps can actually trigger. You can bring that together. Power Apps exists within the scope of Power Platform, which includes Power Automate as well, which is great for automating, mundane tasks. Or if someone, sends a message in a channel, you can have Power Automate send you an email about it or something like that. Lots of different things you can do here. That's a whole nother training. That's so much you can talk about with Power Automate as well. But the big thing here is solutions is what I want to talk about. And solutions are great because this is like, think about a file system, and you have, within your file system, let's say you had a thing for, a project you're working on. Let's say it's like a marketing project. Now, you wouldn't just have like one type of file inside of that folder. You would have maybe PDFs. You would have, maybe some HTML that you're going ahead and sending it out that you saved. Maybe you have spreadsheets to keep track of this, that, or the other, some PowerPoints as well. Solutions kind of encompass everything that can exist within an application. So it can be like connectors to different applications. It can be tables that you have set up here. It could be multiple applications that are actually kind of work with one another that you can create via Canvas apps. So it's a way to kind of, it's logical grouping of your application and things you can export together. Things you're thinking as a whole that constitute to your entire application. So we don't go too much into that because we're really just an exploration of like the Canvas editor today. But when you start creating projects inside of Power Apps, solutions are things you want to keep in mind, keeping everything together, things that are going to rely on one another. They might call a different, connector or things like that, or any kind of custom code you add. You want to have it exist within the same solution, because it kind of goes into the idea of when you're like a professional developer, and if no one, and if you're not, that's totally fine. But this whole idea of DevOps is the word. I don't know. You might have heard that word at times, but that's the whole idea of the solution, kind of keeping everything within the scope, and developing it together, having it all together. So when you actually go ahead and release it, it's kind of releasing everything that is needed at the same time with so your solution or your application or whatever you're applying has everything it needs. So file system, kind of the hierarchy, keep it everything within the solution. That's kind of really all I'm trying to get at here. But let's go ahead and hop into our Canvas editor. So what we're going to do is go ahead and click this create option over here on the left-hand side. You have to pardon me, I am a little under the weather, so if I take a moment to, I don't want to be coughing into the microphone, so I do appreciate everybody's patience there. Right. So multiple different ways to go ahead and create an application. You can start from scratch. You can start with data sources or things like that. As I mentioned before, a Dataverse, SharePoint SQL, those sort of things. But what we're going to start with, just to kind of get used to the interface here of our Canvas editor, is I want you to scroll down. And as I mentioned before, you have templates that are here inside of Power Apps to create Canvas apps for, which is really, really cool. So you might see something in here that your organization could utilize. You could just create it from the template and be done with it. It's not like maybe it doesn't necessarily need to be branded or customer facing, but you can utilize some quick options here inside of Power Apps. And the one that we're going to use today, just to start off, just to get familiar, is this template called My Expenses. Now, depending on your screen size, it might not be over here to the right. So just keep that in mind. But what we're going to do is open up this expense app just by clicking on it here. And as far as the app name is concerned, since we are all in the demo tenant here, do me a favor, as this creates, even though we're not going to save it, it might try to grab the same number that pulled up with mine because of, the call to the server wasn't refreshed, whatever it may be. So just do me a favor, just delete that 4-digit number that appears and just type in your name afterwards. I don't think anyone is overlapping in any names here. Perfect. That's awesome. So you could just use your first name, just so there's no errors when creating it. And then we're going to go ahead and click create. Okay, so it's kind of generating this app from this template, loading it into our Canvas editor. And what you're going to get is this permission prompt here. And this is really, really cool about, about Power Apps, is that this integrates here with all of your essentially services within your M365 environment. And with the template, the way this one's set up here, this is set up to send information to a SharePoint site. We would have to specify it in the app, which site to send it to. But we want to allow that connection. And these are our connectors, and we're going to explore these a little bit more. But what's really cool is that all it needs is your credentials in order to go ahead and make that connection. So if you're creating this app as yourself, and it's going to use your credentials, so you'll see your persona's email address here. You can actually see your permissions to SharePoint that you have as far as things like that, or sites you belong to and you have access to, and if you can add to them or you're just a viewer of them, to where you could go ahead and anything associated with SharePoint, we would allow this application to write to that site or whatever it may be, a list or a table inside of SharePoint, which is really cool, or create files within our SharePoint. And these connectors are essentially, if you were creating an application from write in all these credentials and these calls and these API calls that are made to different places in order to connect this app to other things. And with SharePoint, with Power Apps, it takes care of all of that for you just by utilizing your M365 credentials. So what we're going to do is go ahead and allow this connection here within this application, and that will go ahead and finish up spinning up our application. Now you're going to get this little preview screen. Say here's, if you want any steps or anything. Once again, delete all of that. That's why I'm here. I don't want to lose my job here to all these tutorials. No, I'm just joking. But you can just go ahead and skip this little see this preview of this app. I'll talk about that here. Don't worry about this little warning as far as features enabled. Don't worry. Just go ahead and click Open App. It's not applicable actually to our demo purposes here today. And there are ways to check on that kind of stuff even afterwards, and I'll talk about that here in a moment. All right, so this is our Canvas editor. Here is our application. Now, it's not just this one view of this application, but what I want to do is kind of walk you through essentially what you're looking at here and how to kind of navigate around here within Power Apps. And the first place I want to take you is on the left-hand side to this menu that's called our tree view. And what you're going to see, and this is a lot like thinking like file structures and things like that, like directories. You have a folder and then you have things inside this folder. Well, the way it works here in this tree view in Power Apps is everything's broken up into screens. And what I would recommend you doing is just clicking on some of these different screens that you see here. You can take a look. There's a lot of different things. There's just some message, like a message here, things like that. Edit screens, filtering screens, things like that. These are all of the screens that make up your application, because when you utilize an application, you're not just, when you click on something, it does take you somewhere else. It's not just the screen changes, it's actually taking you to a different view or a different screen. It's what we call, it's like reactive to what you do. There's navigation involved when you actually complete some actions inside of an application, which is pretty cool. So if I choose to like submit a payment or something in this case, if I click submit, I need to also, and this is a big thing with user experience or UX, you might have heard that before. You need to let your user know what they just did, and if it was correct, and if it was wrong, if they're able to undo it, if they're able to go back. Always things that you really, really need to think about. And it can get a little complex as you're thinking through that user experience. If I just had an application, like let's say for this one, to create a new expense and I submitted it, great, that's it. But what if, like on my screen I submitted it for, it had no way to get back to where I could submit another one? Those things, it's like, yeah, all that logic needs to be really thought of. And you need to think of this as like it frontwards and backwards all at the same time when creating your own apps. But cool thing about these templates is it takes care of all of that for you and has everything you need. Essentially, you would just in this one just need to go ahead and say, where do I want to write the data that's entered into this application to? A SharePoint list, for example, or your CRM, whatever it may be. So just things to keep in mind. But this tree view over here on the left-hand side is where you go ahead and navigate between screens. And if you take a look, and I'll just use this first screen that's called My Expenses, you're going to see, things within that view, essentially items or what we call components within this view that you can click on. And if you click on them, you'll notice over here on our Canvas editor, different things will go ahead and highlight. So if I click on the header, this is our header. And these things can be labeled, they can be renamed to exactly what you want them to be. I always recommend being very explicit with what the function or what it is on whatever screen you're creating the item for. So you know what it is, because as your applications get a little more complex, it can get a little confusing. So it's always good here to, specify these things. And these items that are added, they can be anything from text, icons, images, there's other types of media you could add, buttons. I mean, so many different things here, or things to enter data into, which we'll talk about a little bit later, like a data card, for example. So all of these things have different, essentially, there are different components or different items that make up whatever your application of this screen. Now, each one of these, and I'm going to use here, and these icons, it's kind of like you'll have to get used to this as far as the more you use it. Each icon to the left of each one of these items specifies what it is. Like this is an icon type of item. This is text or a label, actually, I'm sorry. This is a shape, and it specifies which shape it is. This header thing is a circle, things like that. But I'm going to go ahead and actually use here this header option right here to kind of discuss a little bit more about here these items and navigating here and how to edit them. Because you would have an item, and essentially it's a label, or it's kind of labels, kind of like a text box. Honestly, think of that if you're thinking about like PowerPoint, to maybe make that association. Sorry. And with each one of these items, it has properties that essentially make up what it is. So first off, what does the label say? What color is it? How big's the font? Where is it on the page? All of these things that can easily be done actually with a couple different ways. And I want to kind of walk you through these different ways. So for the text itself, you're going to see that over here on the left-hand side, when you have an item or any kind of component selected in our tree view, you have a drop-down menu over here on the left-hand side. And if you drop that down, you're going to see a bunch of different, words here. These are our properties of this item. So I can select a property, and let's say here's the text, for example. And then you'll notice here across the top, we have this little, what we call, it's like our, it's like our input for the property itself. And for a text box, it would need to be what we call string or text. So that's why you see it in quotations, to where this is where we'd specify the text. So these are I can change the text, and you can see it reflected there inside of the application. Easy as that. But it's kind of like Excel and like Word kind of mixed together here. I could change the font. You notice here you have like choosing the font size, things like that, color, background color, all of that up here, very much like a Word, very much like Word or Excel or anything like that, kind of that interface that you're used to. But notice there are a ton of other different, properties for these items. It's like, what is, border thickness, border color. That makes a little bit more sense. Overflow, padding bottom, padding left, things like maybe you wouldn't think of. That's like a little bit more as far as the developer kind of side. Like when you think of these things, it kind of equates to what we would call CSS inside of HTML, which is really like a styling aspect of like, CSS exists in other programming languages as well. But it also, depending on the item it can be a little bit more interactive. So if I hover over something, it could change colors. Like if you hover over a button with your mouse, it changes colors to let you know you're on that button, sort of thing. There's more advanced properties with that. So, but you have control of all of that here within Power Apps. Now, certain things like size or where is it on the page, can be done by, giving it numbers, essentially, that's, as far as a gradient on the page. And I want it to be at like 150 and 350 or something like that, which will put it, from the top to bottom, right to left. Those are those two numbers. So, depending on the numbers you put in, where I put it. But the nice thing about it for like us citizen developers is with Power Apps, if I don't want it right there, I can just drag it and move it, and I can just put it wherever I want. That sort of thing. But properties do change, which is kind of interesting. And those more complex properties, I'll throw this back to the top or whatever. I could also, make it smaller, things like that. Like if I just wanted to make it really tiny, you have that ability. It's like that drag and drop resizing functionality, which is really cool, makes it very easy. But over here on the right-hand side, you'll notice you have options to all of those properties as well that you see here from our drop-down menu over here on the left. So you have the ability to do everything over here on the right-hand side as well. Like if I wanted to change the font, change it to, I don't know, Open Sans. It's like almost Comic Sans. Font to never be used. Okay, that's a good one there. Dancing script. How about that? You have the ability to kind of change it like that, like you would in Word or something, which is really cool. You can also specify here, the position of it, the size of it, as far as width and height, padding, which has to do here from our left to right, as far as the sides are concerned, how far it exists from the right-hand margin and left-hand margin is the easy way to think of that. Position as well, where it is on the page, and you can like kind of play with this and kind of see the position numbers change. If I type in here 700, actually it doesn't go that high on this. Sorry, I should do that. I'll do 500. You see here, it'll just kind of move it. So you have the ability to do that as well. But easy enough. It's a lot easier just to kind of drag and drop it for the most part. Now, what there also is and this will kind of be like as advanced as I'll get, is you do have some advanced properties. If you click on the advanced option next to properties over here on the right-hand side, that this gets into, you can actually go ahead and specify colors by like hex codes or RGBA, things like that. You can define properties based on, different actions, other items on the page, where you get into like creating more complex functionality. So there is that possibility. Like I'm not going to go into it, but I want you to know that it is there and you are able to do that. And we'll talk a little bit more about some of that, and I'll show you what the possibilities of that here in a moment. But kind of to round off here this tour of the Canvas app interface, what I want to show you is not introducing, there is Copilot coming to Power Apps, which is to the point where you'll be able to tell Power Apps what you would like. There's a whole understanding how Copilots work is a whole nother training. But there's a few other things I do want to show you here, which we'll talk about. You have the ability to share the project or share the app you're creating. There's a little app checker, which will actually go through, and essentially it goes through the code inside of your application and tells you if there are any errors. So not to the point of like you use the wrong color here, but to the point where like functionality, if something doesn't logically make sense and will not, execute properly. The app checker is a great tool you can use to say, maybe you're referencing an item somewhere that doesn't exist. It'll say that item doesn't exist. You'll have to, maybe I just named it wrong or something, whatever it may be. It helps you out with a lot of that. You have the ability to preview the app. So if you clicked on that, it'll actually take you into a preview screen to where you could actually go ahead and take a look how the app functions. So in this one, you could click around and add a new expense, click on the button, see that there, things like shows you what's selected. You have a filter option. It just allows you to play with your app before you actually, maybe share it and have your team utilize it, which is really good. And you can close that if you did click on that preview. To close the preview, there's a little X up here in the top right-hand corner. And then there's ability to save as well as publish, which I'll show you publishing here at the end. So what we're going to do now is go ahead and we're going to open up a new, I'm sorry, excuse me one second. Pardon. A new application that was created from a SharePoint list. And I'm going to talk more about connectors as well. Talk about data cards. So getting data from your application to a data store and how it's displayed in an application as well. And also publishing your application here before we finish up everything here today. But hopefully this gives you an idea of like what you're looking at when you're looking at the Power Apps, the Canvas app editor, and things like that. Just to give you and now we're going to go ahead and get a little bit deeper with it. So what we're going to do is just go ahead and click back up here in the top left-hand corner. And it's going to ask you to save the changes. Just don't save it. Don't worry about this app here. All the fun you may have had with it, it's totally fine. We're going to go ahead and get rid of it. And now what we're going to do is go ahead, and this is a almost like a template, but it's incorporating a little bit more um, a little bit more organizational specific needs, I think. And it's a great way to kind of kick off your first real interaction or your second real interaction with the Canvas app, I should say. And what we're going to do is go ahead and create an app, but we're going to start from a SharePoint list. So go ahead and select the SharePoint option. So when this is almost like, this is essentially we need to connect first before creating the app. So you're going to see over here on the left-hand side, as I mentioned before, we talked about connectors. Go ahead, you're going to see that same SharePoint connection, just utilizing your user credentials. So go ahead and click on that. And what we're going to do, we need to specify a specific SharePoint site to connect to. Now, the site we're going to connect to, that you might not see recent sites depending on your persona. So don't worry about that. What I'm going to do is grab the URL of the SharePoint site for us all. I thought I had it down already, but not a big deal. It just takes me 2 seconds here to come and grab it. And I'm going to throw this here in the chat. And for Sherry, if you're not seeing it, I'm going to do my best to leave it up on a screen because I know you don't have access to the chat. So what I'm going to do this as well. For you, it's going to make things a little bit easier. I'll leave that up for you. But what we're going to do is go ahead and take this, and let me throw this in the chat. Sorry, I forgot to do that. But we're looking for the Mark 8 project team site. So if you see that under recent sites, that's totally fine because I created a list in here for us to use before we started the training today. So what you're going to do is either grab that Mark 8 project team site, or you can go ahead and grab the URL that I put in our Teams chat here and go ahead and paste that in to that address bar. And you'll be able to go ahead and select that site from entering that address in. And I'm going to go ahead now and click go and choose that site. Let me pull that back up there for Sherry. Didn't forget about you. So the list that we're going to choose, there's only 2 on this site. And we're going to go ahead and choose the Mark 8 parts and spec list. So go ahead and select that list from that page. And then come down to the bottom right-hand corner. You're going to select it like nothing happens. That's okay. Come down to the bottom right-hand corner and click that purple connect button. And it's going to go ahead and create that list. And let me pull that back up for you, Sherry. Okay. 2 more minutes of that up there. We should have plenty of time here to get on through. So when you create these applications from things like lists or essentially what it does for you, and what's really cool is that it'll create essentially just a 3-page application, a way for you to view the list, add to the list, and edit on the list. Which I find super, super useful just for kind of daily kind of needs. Instead of going to the SharePoint site and adding to the list that way, they can have, your organization can have an app to track this information. Maybe especially for like frontline workers and things that maybe don't have a desktop available to them. Very easy for them just to pull up their Power Apps app and open this app up to maybe enter in this case, or kind of like expenses for like or like project details, maybe a sale on a project they're working on, kind of to use your imagination here. Is what we'll have to do. So you'll see over here on the left-hand side are those 3 different. I'll let Lauren back in.
He was gonna say,
Oh, thanks.
Sorry.
Tyler. Sorry.
No problem. And there's 2 people. Lauren is 2 people. Okay. With multiple personalities, Sherry, you might want to help out with that later on. No, I'm sorry. Cool. So we have 3 different screens here that we have. We have a browse screen, we have a detail screen, and we have an edit screen. And what's really cool about this is that this browse screen, if you click on it and take a look, these are all the entries actually in that list. So you have here essentially the ability to access or have anyone access this list and be able to see all of its contents within the scope of just this small little, very functional application. Now, if you needed to like load data elsewhere or anything like that to a different connection or whatever it may be, what you can do is add different connections here to your application. So if you go ahead, and what you'll have to do is click on one of the screens in order to do this. You can't actually click on one of the items, but if I clicked on my screen, this is where I want to talk about more on connectors before we dive in a little bit deeper to this app. So you're going to see an option up here across the top, across our top banner, to add data. And what you'll see is in this app, we already have the connection to our SharePoint list that we set up in the beginning to actually create this app. But then what you'll see here is this option for connectors as well. And this app is utilizing more than one connector, which is actually pretty cool. So this, and I'll talk about it here in a moment, but you can have connectors here to connect to your Office 365 or M365 users. It's connecting to your directory, your Entra directory or Azure Active Directory. It's changed names recently. I'm still getting used to it. But if you click See All Connectors, you have the ability to search so many different connectors that you could utilize within your applications. So when I mentioned earlier on, there's over 200 connectors. There's actually even more than that now that you can connect to different sources, different data sources, different directories, and not all of them are Microsoft. Developers and companies are developing their own connectors because so many people are utilizing Power Apps. They want them to be able to, the Power Apps users to connect to the data they might have stored in other third-party offerings. So if you take a look, I'm trying to find what's a really popular one here. Not GitHub, a Google Calendar. There you go. I mean, anything Google related is, connect to Google Drive. You could have an app that allows people to send things to a business drive or something like that. Or, go ahead and have an app that allows you to view your Google Calendar with an Outlook calendar. I mean, it's the possibilities are honestly, it's your imagination. It's what really is going to fill this and your business needs as you go through it. But you can see there are a ton of different ones. So you're not just like limited to the scope of your M365 services is what I'm trying to go ahead, or Azure services or anything like that. There's so much there for you. But we already have some connectors here. If you just click away from that, it'll go away. But the SharePoint connector connecting to SharePoint, specifically a list that we selected, as well as our M365 users, which allow us to actually search our M365 directory, and you would actually load essentially a profile as well with that. We won't get quite into that, but I'll kind of talk about that as we go through. So what I want to focus on now with this list is this whole idea of the data and kind of interacting with it and what it's doing. So it's all generated from this list. We saw here, if you, and you can have some fun with this. Like I said, I'm not too worried about what you like as far as like components to insert and things like that. You can explore this. I'll leave this demo environment open to where you could take a look here. There's different ways for input, which we'll talk about here in a minute. But like, it's like icons, arrows, this media, which is images, 3D objects, things like that. All of this kind of stuff exists within here, which is just, there's emojis. You could just throw that here in your application and, there it is, and kind of drag it to where you want it, whatever it may be. But what I want to focus on here is like this data getting here and how does it communicate with this SharePoint list? Because this is it's one of the more complex things as far as how this works. And I kind of want to dive into that in a little bit more detail. So what we're going to do is go ahead and we'll actually add an entry, and I'll talk about it here as far as the input's concerned. But if you want to go ahead and open up this detail screen, And then go ahead and expand it, because we're going to talk about one thing very specifically on this page, then how this data kind of makes its way back and forth. So what we want to focus on here is this form, and it's titled Detail Form 1. And if you click on that and expand that, this is almost like a subfolder within here. And what you're going to get are these data cards. And I'm going to go ahead and click on just one of these data cards. Let's use requester, because there's actually a value in it for this entry. And if you go ahead and expand that, this is the what is sent with forms inside of Power Apps, which you can add forms at any point, anywhere. And the data, and then within forms, what you have are data cards. And what data cards are what actually the form sends the data to the list, and the data cards specify the value that you're adding and where does it go, the column. If you think about, you know, a list, the column that it goes in. So each form is essentially the row, and then each card is the column. So if you take a look here at this requester data card, for example, you have a data card value as well as a data card key. And this value is coming from, essentially, you're going to notice here where it says text, and you're going to see this word parent. What this has to do with, and when you see the word parent, especially with pre-configured lists, the parent means it's the entry that you selected from a previous screen. Not to go too crazy here, I will nerd out a little bit here, being a developer myself. There's this thing called state inside of applications, to where we send state between pages. Remember, I talked about, you know, each screen in this has a unique, like, you know, when you click on something, it's actually changing the view, but and changing the screens, which screens are independent of one another. It's kind of like a big map that the application helps you get through by clicking on wherever you want to go. To get the data from one screen to another, you have to pass it between them. It doesn't just, like, it's not just there. It exists on one screen. You have to make it exist on another screen, but you can actually make it exist on a new screen based on what it was in the first screen, which is pretty cool. So that's what that word parent means. It's that passing of state is what we call it, which is really, really cool. And just not to go too crazy here, well, actually, I'll use a different screen to talk about that. So what this page is if I clicked on, and we'll demonstrate this, we'll actually interact with the app and add an entry, and I'll show you on the list where it goes and how it looks. But this is if we were to select something from our browse screen, our gallery, where it's just literally listing the entire list, which is pretty cool. So what we're going to do now is head to the edit screen. And this is where essentially you would go ahead and add an entry. So on the edit screen, also, if we go ahead and expand this as well, I know this gets a little small on my screen. I'm just trying to make it highlight where I'm talking about. You have this edit form, and you have another form. This is another form. This is just like the detail form. It works the same way, honestly, to where if you expand that, you also have data cards as well. So I'm going to use this requester card. So this is essentially each individual item in the column that you want to write to on this list. And like I said, this is all created for you just by, you create a SharePoint list, you can create an application here in Power Apps. And what you have here are the values of this as well as the key. And what's going to happen here is when you actually, if you click on the form itself, the form is sent as a whole. So you can have here, if you require items on a SharePoint list, for example, like a column value has to be filled out to create a new row, it'll tell you within the application that it needs to do that. Power Apps takes care of that for you when you kind of use this template design. But the big thing is, so you fill all this out, and you're going to see there's an attachment section. I'm not sure why, but the big thing is kind of, if it makes kind of sense looking at it, when I click on this check mark, it probably means that I'm, you know, submitting this item or editing it or adding it. And what I want to talk about here is this is where the idea of functionality comes in. And because apps, they do things. You click a button and it does something for you. And if I click on this advanced tab, so go ahead and click on that little checkbox icon, because it's essentially it is a button in some ways. It's an icon, but it can act as a button when pressed. And if you come over here to the advanced section of that icon, you're going to see here this on select. Now, this is kind of your intro to a very basic thing inside of, as far as functionality inside of, or functions, I should say, inside of Power Apps. When I select that button, it does something. And what it's doing is it's running here a function called this. When you can add multiple functions together, and it creates an expression. I guess not to go too far, but I'm trying to, like I said, we have an hour. I'm trying to cram it as much as I can. I apologize if I kind of jumped the gun on that. But you have this expression called submit form. And with that, you're telling Power Apps, okay, submit this form, but you need to specify which form. You can't just say submit form on the button. You have to be explicit. So what we're doing is submitting edit form 1. Well, if I come over here and look at my edit screen, that's what that form is called. So that's the idea of, creating a function and expression to where it actually do something here. I could also have multiple ones here if I wanted to go ahead and write, I could navigate somewhere, on that select. I could head to, I could also, maybe write this to a different data store as well. You could go ahead and say, submit form and to another connection and specify here a different list or something like that. It gets a little bit more complicated, but you can do a lot at once. But just showing you here as far as an action that actually occurs, calling a function, specifying, you're passing an argument essentially through it, which is, I want to submit a form. Well, which form itself? Now this app's set up to just go ahead. It's going to submit to the only connector that it has, which is that list that we have. It's going to submit to that because all of these cards here are mapped to that list, these data cards on the left-hand side. Power Apps took care of a lot of that for us, but the logic itself still applies and can be applied to a multiple of different type of data stores and can do multiple things at once. So just the idea I want to go ahead and go ahead and let you know. So now that we kind of see this here and how these data cards work, let's actually go ahead and preview our app and add an entry and kind of talk about inputs as well as we go through. With these last little 4 minutes here, we're going to get through it all, and I'm going to show you how to publish it. So before we go ahead and demo our app, what I want you to do is come here to this browse screen. So when you demo the app, you always want to start from where your app starts, because you might not have the logic built in to get back here, which you might not need. So it's always good to start where the app's going to open up. So we're going to go ahead and head to that browse screen and go ahead and click preview the app, that little play button up there in the top right-hand corner. So from here, I can see all the entries on my list. I could click on an individual one and see, the data from that entry. I click the back button, and there it is. I can click it again. I can delete it, and it deletes from the list. Now, there are a lot of similar names here. Keep that in mind. They're not the same entry, everybody. So there's a couple that are maybe submitted by Brian Johnson, and that's the name of it, but the data on it is different. So keep that in mind. They're not repeat. So if I wanted to go ahead and add my own, so I'm going to go ahead and type in my name. I'm the requester. The strategic initiative here is you can enter in whatever, actually. So this is just a string, a line of text. This is to learn Power Apps. How about that? And the request amount would just be a dollar amount. So you can see you want your app to, make sense, and you don't want to have to explain it to a user. You want your app to be able to explain itself. That's another big thing about development. What's here, and as far as the input choices that you have, depending on your list, can dictate how your user can make the input. So if I had in my SharePoint list a column that was only a choice between two things, my Power Apps app would go ahead and only give my users that option. So that's that logic. You can have date and time into this to where I'll choose today's date. Why not? This is where it gets into our M365. users to where, let's say I want to go ahead and search for a manager for it. I want to type in my manager's name. Let's say my manager is Grady. I could go ahead and choose Grady, but it's not just Grady's name. It's actually Grady's profile. So Grady could then send an email possibly via Power Automate that I made a request and my manager knows. That's why utilizing profiles instead of just names, but actual like searching for the person itself and utilizing their profile is very beneficial. And then I could go ahead and have, this is a Dynamics project. And this one maybe allows multiple options. So depending on the list, your Power app knows. So I'm going to go ahead and enter that in. And if I scroll all the way down, you will see here, there's Vic. Vic needed gas. That's fine. I needed to learn Power Apps. I'm asking for a lot more money though. So Vic, you'll probably get your gas before I learn Power Apps. But then you can see here, we're added to the list and we can actually view our entries here. And if I head to SharePoint and show you that list itself, that data is being written to that SharePoint list. And there we go. So which is pretty cool. So a simple app to take care of, you might not want everyone moving around in this SharePoint. You know what I mean? I always think frontline workers is a great example. All right. So as far as time is concerned, I just want to show you now. Okay, so let's say you have a great application. It's awesome. And I appreciate, and I apologize for going a little over here, everybody, but if you can hang on just for like 3 minutes with me, I'll show you how to publish these apps, and then I'll give you back your time in your day. So before we publish it, I do want to save it. So I'm going to just click this little save icon here, and I'm going to give it a name. And I recommend just calling it, I'm going to call it Tyler's app because it needs to be unique within its environment. Awesome. And then once it saves, you'll see the little save icon. It's really small. It's actually hard to tell when it's done saving. I don't like that as far as the UI here. But you have this option to publish up here in the top right-hand corner. You can version your app. You can have different versions of it as you develop it. That's a developer-centric kind of thing, to where this will be version maybe 1.1. This is the alpha. So, we're releasing it here for maybe some testing, and then we'll move to beta or whatever. But I'll go ahead and publish this version. And once that application publishes, what I'm going to do is go ahead and click back and leave my app editor. And what I want to now do is go ahead and take a look at my apps over here on the left-hand side. And I'll see my app available. Since I created it, I'm going to see mine here, the one I created. And this is where if you select this app, if you select the little radio button to the next of it, or here from the little horizontal ellipsis, you have the option to go ahead and share this app. So if I click here, I can add it to my team site to where, and that's usually what I recommend. You could share it with other users. So if I click share, I could go ahead and add people here to share with, or, invite my entire organization. If I typed everyone here, everyone in Contoso, the demo organization would get a link to this app to use it. But what I really recommend here is in Teams. I think that's the most applicable way. So if I click add to Teams and go ahead, I'm going to click add to Teams. So what it's going to do, it's going to take me into Teams. And I'm going to use the web version. Use the web version. Don't launch your own Teams on your own desktop because we're on it right now in this meeting. And what I'm essentially doing is publishing it to Teams to where my team members can then add it to their team screen. So I'm adding my app to our organization's Teams by doing this. So I'm going to go ahead and click add. Now, what your coworkers would be allowed to do, and you essentially, if you want to access the app, the person itself has to have the permissions to that SharePoint. So they use the same connector that you do, but as them, because they're not writing as you to your app, to that list. When they access the app, they're acting as themselves. You're giving them permission to access the app, but then SharePoint also needs to know, hey, can this person write to this list? That sort of thing. So there's a lot of background things as far as permissions are concerned. But what you can do then is run this app within your own Teams. And most people like pull up Teams on their phone, and I would say, there's a Power Apps app as well. But most of the time it's Teams, I think. And it's just like kind of over here in the app section to where you could actually go ahead and see your own um, Power Platform applications built by your organization. So I could just like, as you see here, here's my app. I'm going to add this to my teams like I just did before. You could add this also to a specific team or a channel or a specific chat. And then once it's here, you could also pin it. So if you're something you're utilizing very often, you have quick and easy access to it. Pull up Teams, there's the app, do the thing, done. So instead of going to the list, making sure it's added, oh, I need to edit it, going back there, it's kind of all within the scope of one thing. If you're out and about, doing that on a phone, creating a phone-like application makes it a lot easier. All right. Well, I appreciate everybody here hanging out with us. We tried to fit as much as we can and give you as much knowledge as I could here within the time that we had. But I really, really do appreciate everybody hanging out with us. Hope everyone was able to learn a little bit of something here. If you have no experience with Power Apps, got some time in there. Some things as far as data were concerned, forms, data cards, great place to start. It does get more complex, trust me, it can, but it's a really, really easy way to, really great start, place to start. SharePoint lists are, super easy to create. If you have Teams, you have SharePoint, so you can do both. SharePoint's the back end of Teams, where your files are stored. So yeah. Just something really quick and easy, and playing with colors and making things look pretty. That's all stuff I always recommend. Have some fun with it. It's let your creative side come out. But always thinking about the user. If I can pass on anything, any word of advice when creating your own Power Apps, always have the user in mind. So make sure accessibility is okay, is all set. That users, depending on, you got to cater to all accessibility needs. Also making sure that your application doesn't need to be explained. It just makes sense. So that's placing buttons in places, using icons that make sense, using text to explain what's going on as far as, this is to open, this is to close sort of thing. It's all about that user experience, because not everyone has the same experience levels with applications. So, you need to be very explicit, very obvious, and always keep in mind that your user is not always just you. It's every other kind of person you can think of. So always recommend keep that in mind when developing, for one developer now to others, because you are all now developers. So put it on your resume. I hope that helps you out. Maybe ask for a raise. I don't know, but really appreciate everybody hanging out today. We are a little bit over time, but thanks for sticking on. I just wanted to get through all of that and talk about publishing, because you create this app, you want people to use it. So I got to show you how to use it as well. So we're going to go ahead and sign off here, everybody. But want to thank everybody here. Want to thank OnPar as well. Donna, Kevin, Olivia, thanks so much, everybody. Any questions before we log off here today? I want to open that up as well. If you want to hang on, I'm absolutely here for you.
Tyler, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome, Vic. No problem. No problem.
Thanks everybody for joining today. We appreciate it. And if you need some help with any of this, please reach out and we can talk about our services around, helping you guys out.
Yeah, thank you. I was Donna. I was about to go ahead into that as well. The condensed time, I wanted to make sure I got everything. But reach out to the OnPar team. They're great here for you as far as kind of helping you. Especially just move on with your or further your experience here with Power Apps, because like I said, we were just kind of the tip of the iceberg today. So really wanted to make sure that everyone got that information in, really got those gears kind of going inside of your head, and any more questions you had, reach out to OnPar. And super thankful to have you all here today for today's training. Lauren, you are welcome. Thanks for joining us. And thank you, Elsa. Thank you, everyone else as well. Hopefully we see you all again sometime soon, but have a great rest of your day, everybody.